Hello, I'm Emma Webb, and we are here at the very, very end of the ARC conference, and I'm glad to be joined by Andy Ngo, who is the senior editor of the Post Millennial, and also by Associate Professor of Philosophy of Religion at Cambridge, and also, importantly, on the advisory board of this conference here, ARC, James Orr. So thank you both of you so much for joining us. So Andy, I want to start with you talking about what we've seen over the last couple of weeks here in London since that massacre that happened on the 7th of October. We've seen a lot happening on our streets. You've been reporting on it directly. So can you give us your assessment of what's been happening? And I know particularly one incident that happened last night.
Yeah, so one of the themes of this conference is about social cohesion and also identity and citizenship. And before and during the conference, there have been a number of pro-Palestine protests, as they are called, in London with displays of religious extremism and violent extremist support. Last night in Whitehall, outside Downing Street, there was a emergency direct action protest where one of the protesters in Arabic, some of these chants are done in Arabic, so it kind of goes under the radar, even though police are right there. But one of the chants translated into English was a call for Hamas to bomb Tel Aviv. And this is normal for these demonstrations, as I've witnessed. And last night after those chants, people did a street prayer, a large street prayer. So I'm an American, as an outsider observing all this. It's different in part to the huge demonstrations that have been happening in America as well. In that there are those who view this, what's happening with Israel and Hamas as explicitly a religious conflict and a religious war. And they view it as a duty, and they're saying that it's the duty of Muslims to support jihad or to mobilize for it.
And James, you're, as I mentioned, on the advisory board of this conference. One of the big themes of sort of the thread running throughout a lot of the talks and conversations that people have been having has been about mending the social fabric, which seems to, as we've seen through these demonstrations, our values, the shared values that we have as a society, seem to be completely torn into tatters. So from your perspective, and particularly I know there's a sort of religious dimension to this, the values that we hold as a society, sort of trying to revive our national story. How important is that in responding to what Andy has just described?
Well, pro-nation ideologies always stress what's good about the nation. What's good about the nation historically, or at least very often, has been that it's an antidote to more ancient ethnic loyalties that are very, very difficult to transcend. But what you need for that is a pride, albeit a qualified pride, in one's national identity, and a clear-eyed view of our history, and a sense of pride in our history too. That's what stitches us together as a demos. Without a demos, democracy crumbles. And that means that we need to have a political culture, we need to have a society in which we stand shoulder to shoulder, we fix our eyes on a common horizon and what unifies us. And one of the troubling aspects of the protests that we've seen in recent weeks, and Andy's been following them a lot more closely than I have, is the number of flags being flown of countries other than the UK. I've scarcely seen a Union Jack anywhere. And this would suggest not just, I think, a failure on the part of people who have arrived and clearly owe a political loyalty, a greater political loyalty to maybe origin countries, but also a failure on our part to inculcate a sense of pride, a national story, a way of thinking about Britain that can displace loyalties to origin countries and that can stitch us together in a common endeavour. And that's what we've been trying to do, I think, over the last 3 days. Trying to find, the theme of the conference is looking for a better story. It's not a story that we just make up as we go along. It's a story that's better because it's truer. It's clear-eyed. It's rooted in a proper moral diagnosis of what's gone wrong and It's rooted in facts, as we saw, the debates over ESG, the debates over climate, but it's also rooted in a sense of optimism, a sense of hope. The sort of darkness that seems to be descending on all these different fronts can be dissipated, that we really can overcome it.
And Bishop Barron gave what I thought was a phenomenal speech, and I'm a fan of Bishop Barron's work anyway, but he mentioned specifically anthropology, and that strikes me as something that's very important here. So he was talking about differences and different conceptions of freedom. How important do you think it is to almost try to philosophically fix at the root some of the problems that seem to have gone wrong in our civilization?
It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's certainly incredibly difficult to do it as well as Bishop Barron did yesterday. I was joking with a friend that if the Church of England had one bishop who could speak as knowledgeably and inspiringly about such technical philosophical issues and could speak so well about the importance of getting a proper conception of human nature, that is to say, a sense of human beings as capable of great good, capable of great evil, not too pessimistic but not too optimistic either, then we'd be in a much better place. But he's absolutely right. I mean, a lot of these dialogues of the deaf that we've been having on all sorts of policy areas are downstream of a more fundamental conflict between two conceptions of what it is to be a human being. On the one hand, as Bishop Barron argues, an idea that human nature is given. That is to say, we are born into the world, we take on unchosen obligations. We can't simply liberate ourselves from all obligations to family, to neighborhood, to kin, to nation, without creating a kind of tyranny. It might seem like freedom, but in fact, we need dependence, we need those obligations, we need relationality, we need a sense of commitment to the common good. And I thought he laid that out beautifully, the sort of rival conceptions of freedom. Freedom to be able to do the good and to pursue the good, and the raw anarchic freedom of the existentialists.
And finally, Andy, you've written a best-selling book on far left extremism, as well as reporting on Islamist extremism, not only here in the UK but also in the US. What's been your main takeaway from this conference? I guess I know you've been here from the very beginning, having conversations with different people, but also witnessing what's been happening in the talks themselves. What for you do you think is the biggest takeaway in terms of responding to the problems that you've identified in your work?
So this is an international conference, but among the British speakers or the British people I've been speaking to, I'm not sure if I've seen an answer yet to what does it mean to be a British citizen, what is British identity. Generally, how I've seen it defined by this government is it's about tolerance and diversity, multiculturalism. From what I've seen of the demonstrations in London, I don't see how that identity can compete with a Islamic identity, which really provides narrative, meaning and purpose that is actually really clear in how it's explained. So I guess I just leave here wondering what does it mean to be British actually, because if with the other competing identities you have in Britain, I don't see how that could
do you think that story and
appeal.
narrative is something that, in terms of mending the social fabric, that story and narrative, even if maybe that sort of conclusive conclusion hasn't been reached, that trying to revitalize some kind of national story is important in trying to create a resilient response to the strong identities that you see through identity politics?
I don't know how that can be done when you have now a really diverse society of communities coming from all over the world for generations. It's actually really hard, I think. And I'm just observing what I see, but I'm not quite sure how that can be done.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you, James, for joining us.
My pleasure.